In a small suburban middle school, laughter echoed through the hallways as students shuffled into their homeroom. The morning sun streamed through the windows, casting golden patterns on the tiled floor. Among the students was Marcus Johnson, a 13-year-old boy with a big personality and an even bigger imagination. He was known for his jokes, his energy, and his knack for making people laugh. Whether it was during lunch breaks or in the middle of class, Marcus always found a way to lighten the mood. His classmates loved him for it, though sometimes he pushed things too far. Marcus's teacher, Mrs. Anderson, had taught at the school for over a decade. She was strict but fair, and most of her students respected her. However, she often struggled with students like Marcus, kids who were loud, restless, and constantly seeking attention. On this particular morning, Mrs. Anderson stood at the front of the classroom writing the day's agenda on the whiteboard. Her sharp eyes scanned the room, ensuring everyone was settled. As usual, Marcus wasn't paying much attention. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, balancing it precariously on two legs while chatting with his friends. Today's topic was role models, and Mrs. Anderson had asked the class to share who they looked up to. Some kids mentioned athletes, others talked about famous actors, and a few even named their parents. When it came time for Marcus to speak, he grinned mischievously. "You know what?" he said loudly enough to grab everyone's attention. "My dad is Diddy." The room erupted into giggles. Some kids rolled their eyes while others teased Marcus playfully. "Yeah, right, Marcus," one boy called out. "Next thing you'll say is you're going to be a millionaire rapper." Marcus didn't miss a beat. "I am serious," he insisted, puffing out his chest for dramatic effect. "Diddy is my dad. That's why I'm destined to be rich and famous." Mrs. Anderson, who had been quietly observing the exchange, finally spoke up. "Marcus," she said dryly, crossing her arms over her chest. "Do you really expect anyone to believe that Sean Diddy Combs is your father? That's ridiculous." Her tone carried more bite than usual, and instead of letting it slide like she might have on another day, she pressed further. "Why don't you tell us something believable for once?" The class fell silent. All eyes turned to Marcus, whose smile quickly faded. For a moment he looked stunned, unsure how to respond. Then, feeling embarrassed, he muttered, "It was just a joke." But Mrs. Anderson wasn't done. "Jokes are fine, Marcus," she said sharply, "but there's a difference between being funny and trying to get attention by saying silly things. You need to take this seriously." Marcus felt heat rise to his cheeks. What started as a harmless joke now stung deeply. He slumped back in his seat, avoiding eye contact with both his teacher and his classmates. The teasing had stopped, replaced by an uncomfortable silence. Even the kids who usually laughed along with Marcus seemed uneasy. No one liked seeing someone get called out like that. Later that day, as Marcus sat alone at lunch replaying the scene in his mind, he couldn't shake the feeling of shame. Sure, he knew deep down that Diddy wasn't really his dad. But the comment hadn't been entirely made up either. Growing up without a father figure, Marcus often dreamed of having someone powerful and successful to look up to. In his mind, claiming Diddy as his dad was less about lying and more about escaping the harsh realities of his life, even if only for a little while. At home, things weren't easy. Marcus lived with his mom, Lisa, who worked 2 jobs to make ends meet. They rarely saw each other because of her long hours, and when they did, she was usually too tired to talk. Still, Lisa always encouraged Marcus to dream big. "You can be anything you want to be," she'd tell him. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." But today, those words felt hollow. Mrs. Anderson's comment had cut deeper than Marcus cared to admit. It wasn't just the mockery, it was the way she dismissed him so publicly, as if his dreams or imagination were worthless. For the rest of the day, Marcus stayed quiet, keeping to himself and avoiding any further interaction with his teacher. Back in the classroom, Mrs. Anderson tried to focus on her lesson plan, but something nagged at her. As she glanced over at Marcus, who was unusually subdued, guilt began creeping in. She replayed the moment in her head. Sure, Marcus could be a handful, but her reaction felt unnecessarily harsh. She realized too late that her sarcasm might have crossed a line. As a teacher, she prided herself on fostering creativity and confidence in her students, not tearing them down. Her thoughts drifted to Marcus's background. She knew his family struggled financially. His single mother worked tirelessly to provide for him. Maybe this was why Marcus clung to fantasies. He wanted to escape reality, even if only for a little while. Guilt settled heavily in her stomach. She resolved to apologize to him tomorrow, hoping it wasn't too late to repair the damage. That evening, as Marcus lay in bed staring at the ceiling, he thought about what had happened. He wondered if Mrs. Anderson would bring it up again, or if she'd forget about it completely. Either way, he decided not to dwell on it. After all, he reminded himself life was full of challenges. If he wanted to succeed, he'd have to learn how to handle criticism and keep moving forward. Little did Marcus know, this incident would mark the beginning of a journey neither he nor Mrs. Anderson could have predicted. While the road ahead would be filled with obstacles, it would also lead to growth, redemption, and a newfound understanding between student and teacher. The next morning, Marcus walked into class with his shoulders slouched and his head down. He avoided eye contact with Mrs. Anderson as he took his seat near the back of the room. The teasing from the day before still lingered in his mind, and he couldn't shake the embarrassment that clung to him like a shadow. Some of his classmates whispered and giggled when they saw him, but most were too busy chatting about their weekend plans to pay much attention. Mrs. Anderson stood at the front of the classroom, organizing her papers and preparing for the day's lesson. But something was different about her today. Her usual stern expression seemed softer, almost thoughtful. As the students settled into their seats, she glanced toward Marcus more than once, her eyes lingering on him longer than usual. It was clear she had something on her mind. When the bell rang, signaling the start of class, Mrs. Anderson didn't immediately begin her lecture. Instead, she cleared her throat and said, "Before we dive into today's work, I'd like to address something important." The room grew quiet. Students exchanged curious glances, wondering what this could be about. Mrs. Anderson rarely interrupted, her schedule for anything outside the curriculum. She turned her gaze directly to Marcus. "Marcus," she called gently, "can you come up here for a moment?" Marcus froze. His heart raced as every pair of eyes in the room shifted to him. For a brief second, he considered pretending not to hear her, but he knew that wouldn't help. Slowly, he stood up and made his way to the front of the class, his sneakers squeaking against the floor. He kept his head low, avoiding everyone's stares. Once Marcus was standing beside her desk, Mrs. Anderson took a deep breath. "Class," she began, addressing the entire room. "Yesterday, I said something I regret. Something that wasn't fair to Marcus." The students exchanged confused looks. No one expected an apology. Not from Mrs. Anderson, anyway. She continued, "I mocked Marcus for saying something imaginative, and I shouldn't have done that. Everyone is allowed to dream big, no matter how far-fetched those dreams may seem. Mocking someone for having imagination goes against everything I believe in as a teacher." Her words hung in the air. Marcus blinked, unsure how to react. He hadn't anticipated this kind of public acknowledgement. The tension in the room slowly dissolved as some students nodded in agreement, while others looked genuinely surprised by their teacher's vulnerability. Turning to Marcus, Mrs. Anderson softened her tone even further. "Marcus, I owe you an apology. My comment yesterday wasn't respectful, and it wasn't fair. I want you to know that your ideas, whether they're jokes or serious aspirations, matter. You have every right to imagine yourself achieving great things, and I'm sorry for making you feel otherwise." For a moment, Marcus didn't say anything. He stared at the floor, processing her words. Then quietly he admitted, "It's okay, I guess." But Mrs. Anderson wasn't satisfied with such a vague response. "No, Marcus," she said firmly yet kindly. "It's not okay. Teachers are supposed to support their students, not discourage them. And if I ever make you feel small again, I hope you'll tell me." Marcus finally lifted his head and met her gaze. There was sincerity in her eyes, and for the first time since the incident, he felt a flicker of relief. Still, part of him wondered if this sudden change was genuine or just another attempt to smooth things over. Later that afternoon, after class had ended, Mrs. Anderson stayed behind to reflect on what had happened. She sat at her desk, staring at the stack of ungraded papers in front of her but unable to focus. Her mind kept drifting back to Marcus, the way he'd looked so defeated after her comment, the awkward silence that followed her apology, and the uncertainty in his voice when he accepted it. She realized now that her reaction had been fueled by frustration. Marcus was often disruptive, cracking jokes at inappropriate times and drawing attention away from the lesson. While she appreciated his creativity, she sometimes found it exhausting to manage. Yesterday, in the heat of the moment, she had let her irritation get the better of her. But deep down, she knew that wasn't an excuse. As she thought more about Marcus's background, guilt settled heavily in her chest. She remembered overhearing snippets of conversations between other teachers about his home life. His mother worked long hours to provide for him, leaving little time for family bonding. Without a father figure around, Marcus likely craved guidance and validation. Claiming Diddy as his dad might have been silly, but it also revealed a deeper longing to belong, to be admired, to have someone to look up to. Mrs. Anderson sighed, rubbing her temples. She had always prided herself on being a supportive teacher, someone who inspired her students to reach for their dreams. Yet in this instance, she had failed miserably. If she wanted to regain Marcus's trust and her own integrity, she would need to do more than apologize. She needed to show him that she truly believed in him. Over the next few days, Mrs. Anderson made a conscious effort to engage with Marcus differently. During group activities, she paired him with quieter students, encouraging him to take on leadership roles. When he raised his hand to answer questions, she gave him her full attention, even if his answers weren't always correct. And during independent work sessions, she checked in with him regularly, offering praise for his efforts rather than focusing solely on results. At first, Marcus remained cautious. He wasn't sure whether Mrs. Anderson's newfound kindness was temporary or if it signaled a real shift in their relationship. But as the days passed, he began to notice subtle changes, not just in her behavior, but in how he felt about himself. For the first time in a long while, he started to believe that maybe his dreams weren't so ridiculous after all. One afternoon, while working on a creative writing assignment, Marcus found himself daydreaming about music. Ever since he was a child, he'd loved listening to hip-hop and imagining himself performing on stage. Now, inspired by Mrs. Anderson's encouragement, he decided to write about it. He filled page after page with lyrics, beats, and stories about overcoming struggles. By the time the bell rang, he had written several verses, his very first rap song. When Mrs. Anderson noticed how engrossed he was in his work, she asked if he'd like to share it with her. At first, Marcus hesitated, worried she might criticize him. But then he remembered her apology and her promise to support him. Taking a deep breath, he handed her the notebook. Mrs. Anderson read through the lyrics carefully, her eyebrows raising in surprise. The words were raw and honest, reflecting Marcus's hopes, fears, and resilience. When she finished reading, she looked up at him with genuine admiration. "Marcus," she said, "this is incredible. Have you ever thought about pursuing music?" "Seriously?" Marcus shrugged, trying to play it cool. "I don't know," he replied. "Maybe someday." "Well," Mrs. Anderson said with a smile, "if you keep writing like this, someday might come sooner than you think." That evening, as Marcus walked home, he couldn't stop thinking about Mrs. Anderson's reaction. For years, he'd dismissed his love for music as a silly hobby, something he did to pass the time. But now, thanks to his teacher's encouragement, he began to see it as something more. Maybe his dreams weren't so impossible after all. Little did he know, this newfound confidence would soon lead him down a path he never expected, one filled with challenges, growth, and unexpected opportunities. Meanwhile, Mrs. Anderson watched proudly from the sidelines, determined to help Marcus realize his potential. Though neither of them could foresee the twists and turns ahead, both were beginning to understand the power of redemption and the importance of believing in oneself and each other. Over the next few weeks, Marcus and Mrs. Anderson's relationship began to transform in ways neither of them had anticipated. What started as a simple apology evolved into something deeper, a mutual understanding that neither would forget anytime soon. For Marcus, it was the first time he felt truly seen by an adult outside his family. For Mrs. Anderson, it became a turning point in how she approached teaching, not just for Marcus but for all her students. Mrs. Anderson made a deliberate effort to nurture Marcus's creativity rather than suppress it. She introduced new assignments designed to encourage imagination and self-expression. One project stood out above the rest: My Future Self. Students were tasked with creating a presentation about their goals and aspirations. They could choose any format: written essays, posters, videos, or even performances. The only rule was that they had to put thought and effort into it. When Mrs. Anderson announced the project, some students groaned, thinking it would be another boring assignment. But Marcus's eyes lit up immediately. He saw this as an opportunity to channel his passion for music into something tangible. That evening, sitting at the kitchen table while his mom worked late, Marcus sketched out ideas for his presentation. He decided to create a mock-up of his future career as a music producer, inspired by none other than Diddy himself. The days leading up to the project deadline were filled with excitement and hard work for Marcus. He spent hours researching famous producers, studying their techniques, and learning about the music industry. Using free design tools on his phone, he created sketches of album covers featuring bold fonts and vibrant colors. He wrote detailed descriptions of songs he imagined producing, complete with playlists and artist collaborations. To top it off, he drafted a fictional interview with a magazine where he talked about his journey from dreaming big in middle school to becoming one of the most sought-after producers in the world. His mom, Lisa, noticed the change in him. Normally, Marcus rushed through homework so he could get back to playing video games or watching TV, but now he poured his energy into this project, staying up late to perfect every detail. When Lisa peeked over his shoulder one night and saw what he was working on, she smiled proudly. "Marcus," she said softly, "this looks amazing. You're really putting your heart into this." He grinned, though there was still a hint of uncertainty in his voice. "Yeah, I guess. I just hope it's good enough." Lisa placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's more than good enough. This is you, and no matter what anyone says, you should always be proud of showing who you are." Her words gave him the confidence boost he needed. By the time the presentation day arrived, Marcus had crafted something truly special, a glimpse into a future where his dreams came true. On the morning of the presentations, the classroom buzzed with anticipation. Some students fidgeted nervously, while others chatted excitedly about their projects. Marcus sat quietly in his seat, clutching his folder tightly. Despite his preparation, he couldn't shake the nerves creeping up inside him. What if his classmates laughed at him again? What if Mrs. Anderson thought his idea was silly? When it was finally his turn, Marcus walked to the front of the room with hesitant steps. His heart pounded as he set up his materials on the desk. Taking a deep breath, he turned to face his classmates and began speaking. "My name is Marcus Johnson, and when I grow up, I want to be a music producer like Diddy," he started, his voice trembling slightly. "I know people might think it's impossible, but I believe anything can happen if you work hard enough." As he spoke, he showed the class his sketches of album covers, his playlist ideas, and the mock interview. He explained how he'd combine different genres to create unique sounds and collaborate with artists from all over the world. With each word, his confidence grew. By the end of his presentation, Marcus wasn't just talking about his dream, he was living it. When he finished, the room erupted into applause. Even the kids who used to tease him clapped enthusiastically, clearly impressed by his vision. Mrs. Anderson beamed with pride, nodding approvingly from her seat. "Well done, Marcus," she said once the applause died down. "That was incredible. Not only did you show us your talent, but you also reminded us that dreams matter. Keep believing in yourself because you have so much potential." Marcus's cheeks flushed with pride. For the first time in a long while, he felt unstoppable. After class, Mrs. Anderson pulled Marcus aside for a private conversation. You blew me away today, she admitted, her tone warm and encouraging. Your presentation wasn't just creative, it was inspiring. You've got real talent, Marcus. Don't let anyone, including me, diminish that. He nodded, feeling a mix of gratitude and determination. Thanks, Mrs. Anderson. I'll keep working on my music. Who knows? Maybe someday I'll actually make it big. I have no doubt you will, she replied firmly. But remember, success isn't just about fame. It's about staying true to yourself and never giving up, no matter how tough things get. Despite the newfound encouragement from his teacher, life outside school remained challenging for Marcus. At home, money was tight, and his mom often reminded him that dreaming big wouldn't pay the bills. Still, Marcus refused to give up. Inspired by his project, he started experimenting with beats using a free app he downloaded onto his phone. Late at night, after finishing his homework, he'd sit hunched over the screen, piecing together melodies. Sometimes he recorded snippets of his raps, listening to them over and over until they sounded just right. Meanwhile, word spread around school about Marcus's musical aspirations. Some students teased him again, calling him Diddy Jr. behind his back. But this time, Marcus handled it differently. Rather than getting defensive, he laughed along with them, confident in his abilities. Slowly, his resilience earned him respect from even the toughest critics. One day during lunch, a group of older boys approached him. Marcus tensed up, expecting another round of jokes. Instead, one of them held out a phone. Hey man, we heard you're making music. Can we listen to something? Caught off guard, Marcus hesitated before pulling out his own phone. He played one of his tracks, a short instrumental beat layered with rhythmic drums and smooth bass lines. The older boys listened intently, nodding their heads in approval. This is actually pretty dope, one of them said. You should keep doing this. Marcus grinned, feeling a sense of validation he hadn't experienced before. From that moment on, those same boys who once teased him became some of his biggest supporters. Back in the classroom, Mrs. Anderson noticed the change in Marcus. Determined to help him further, she reached out to a friend who taught music production at a local community college. Together, they arranged for Marcus to attend a weekend workshop designed for aspiring young artists. Though hesitant at first, Marcus agreed to go, eager to learn more. At the workshop, Marcus soaked up every bit of knowledge like a sponge. He learned technical skills, collaborated with peers, and received feedback from professionals. By the end of the program, he'd created a short demo track that impressed everyone, including his instructor. Encouraged by the experience, Marcus returned to school with renewed determination. He continued working on his music, refining his craft, and sharing his progress with anyone willing to listen. Mrs. Anderson watched proudly from the sidelines, knowing she had played a small part in helping him find his voice. Little did Marcus know, this was just the beginning of his journey. Challenges still lay ahead, but armed with confidence, creativity, and the unwavering support of his teacher, he was ready to face whatever came his way. And Mrs. Anderson? She carried the memory of Marcus's growth close to her heart, reminding herself daily of the power of second chances and the importance of believing in her students. Despite the newfound encouragement from Mrs. Anderson and his growing confidence, life outside school remained tough for Marcus. At home, money was tighter than ever. His mom, Lisa, worked tirelessly at 2 jobs, cleaning offices during the day and waitressing at a diner in the evenings. Even with her long hours, bills piled up and there was barely enough left over to cover groceries. The stress of their situation weighed heavily on both of them. Marcus tried not to complain. He understood how hard his mom worked, but sometimes the weight of their struggles felt overwhelming. Late at night, when he should have been sleeping, he'd lie awake listening to the hum of the refrigerator or the distant sound of cars passing by. His mind would drift to thoughts of Diddy, not because he still believed the rapper was his dad, but because imagining himself as someone successful helped him escape reality. Music became Marcus's refuge. After finishing his homework each evening, he'd grab his phone and open the beat-making app he'd installed weeks ago. Sitting cross-legged on the floor of his tiny bedroom, he'd lose himself in rhythms and melodies. Sometimes he'd write lyrics about his dreams. Other times, he'd pour out his frustrations into raw verses that captured the pain of feeling invisible. But even music couldn't shield him from the challenges of everyday life. One Friday afternoon, as Marcus walked home from school, he noticed a group of older kids loitering near the corner store. They weren't strangers. They were neighborhood bullies who often mocked anyone younger or weaker than them. When they spotted Marcus, one of them shouted, "Hey, look who it is, Diddy Jr." The others laughed, closing in around him. Marcus clenched his fists, trying to stay calm. He'd learned to ignore insults like this before, but today, something inside him snapped. "Leave me alone," he said firmly, his voice trembling slightly. "Oh, what are you gonna do?" One of the boys sneered, stepping closer. "Call your rich daddy to save you?" Marcus wanted to lash out, to defend himself, but he knew better. Fighting wouldn't solve anything, it would only make things worse. Instead, he took a deep breath and turned away, walking briskly toward home. As he rounded the corner, he could still hear their laughter echoing behind him. When he got home, Marcus slammed the door shut and threw his backpack onto the couch. Tears welled up in his eyes, but he refused to let them fall. He hated feeling powerless, like no matter how hard he tried, nothing changed. For a moment, he considered giving up on his music altogether. What was the point if people kept tearing him down? The next morning, Marcus dragged himself out of bed, dreading another day at school. But as he entered the classroom, Mrs. Anderson greeted him with a warm smile. She seemed to sense that something was wrong. "Are you okay, Marcus?" she asked quietly after class began. He shrugged, avoiding her gaze. "Yeah, I'm fine." Mrs. Anderson didn't push him further, at least not right then. But later that afternoon, she pulled him aside during recess. "You know you can talk to me about anything, right?" she said gently. "If something's bothering you, I want to help." For a moment, Marcus hesitated. He didn't like showing weakness, especially to adults, but something about Mrs. Anderson's tone made him feel safe. Slowly, he opened up about the bullying and the constant struggle of living paycheck to paycheck. By the time he finished, tears streaked his face. Mrs. Anderson listened intently, her expression softening with every word. When Marcus finally fell silent, she placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Thank you for sharing that with me," she said. "I know life isn't easy for you right now, but please remember, you're stronger than you think, and you're not alone." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "There's a program at the community center downtown called Youth Voices. It's a place where kids like you can express themselves through art and music. I think it might be a good fit for you. Would you be interested in checking it out?" Marcus wiped his eyes and nodded slowly. Anything that offered an escape sounded appealing. That Saturday, Marcus attended his first session at Youth Voices. The center was buzzing with activity. Kids painting murals, practicing dance, routines, and rehearsing songs. In one corner, a group of teenagers huddled around a laptop mixing tracks and experimenting with sounds. Marcus felt nervous at first, unsure if he belonged there. But the instructors welcomed him warmly, introducing him to other participants and encouraging him to share his work. By the end of the session, Marcus had formed a small team with 3 other aspiring musicians. Together, they brainstormed ideas for a collaborative project, a song that blended hip-hop beats with spoken word poetry. Over the next few weeks, they spent hours refining their track, bouncing ideas off each other and cheering one another on. For the first time in a long while, Marcus felt like he was part of something bigger than himself. Back at school, Marcus's newfound passion spilled over into his academics. Inspired by his progress at Youth Voices, he started participating more actively in class discussions. During a history lesson about civil rights leaders, he raised his hand and shared how music had been used as a tool for social change. Mrs. Anderson smiled approvingly, noting how much Marcus had grown since the beginning of the year. Even the bullies seemed to back off. Word spread quickly among students that Marcus was involved in something meaningful. Some even approached him to ask about his music, genuinely curious. Though he remained cautious, Marcus realized that standing up for himself and pursuing his dreams had earned him respect. One evening, as Marcus sat at the kitchen table working on new lyrics, Lisa came home earlier than usual. She looked exhausted but managed a tired smile when she saw him scribbling furiously in his notebook. "What are you working on?" she asked, setting her purse down. "It's a song," Marcus replied. "About never giving up, even when things get hard." Lisa leaned over to read the lines he'd written. Her eyes softened as she recognized fragments of her son's journey woven into the words. "This is beautiful, Marcus," she whispered. "You've always had such a big heart. Don't ever lose that." Her praise meant the world to him. For so long, Marcus had doubted whether his dreams were worth chasing. Now, surrounded by support, from his mom, his teacher, and his peers, he began to believe they were possible. As the weeks turned into months, Marcus continued honing his craft. He performed at local events organized by youth voices, gaining confidence with each performance. One night after a particularly successful show, Mrs. Anderson approached him backstage. "I'm so proud of you," she said, pulling him into a hug. "See? I told you dreams matter." Marcus grinned, feeling a sense of accomplishment wash over him. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would still be obstacles, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But for the first time in his life, he truly believed he could overcome them. All it took was courage, determination, and a little faith, from others and from himself. And Mrs. Anderson? She carried the memory of Marcus's transformation close to her heart, reminding herself daily of the impact one person could have on another's life. Months passed and Marcus's life began to change in ways he never imagined. The confidence he gained from making music and performing at local events spilled over into every aspect of his life. At school, he became more focused, earning better grades and participating actively in class discussions. Even the bullies who once mocked him now treated him with a mix of respect and curiosity. His peers often asked him about his latest projects, eager to hear snippets of his new songs or see sketches of album covers he'd designed. Mrs. Anderson watched proudly as Marcus transformed from the boy who once slouched in his seat, avoiding eye contact, into someone who carried himself with purpose. She knew that his journey wasn't just about music. It was about finding his voice and learning to believe in himself despite the challenges he faced. Still, she couldn't help but wonder how long this newfound momentum would last. Life had a way of testing even the strongest resolve, and Marcus still had plenty of obstacles ahead. One afternoon, Mrs. Anderson announced an upcoming talent showcase at the school. It was an annual event where students could perform skits, sing songs, play instruments, or display any other talents they wanted to share. "This is your chance to shine," she told the class enthusiastically. "Anyone interested in signing up should let me know by the end of the week." The room buzzed with excitement as students whispered among themselves about what they might do. Some planned dance routines, while others talked about singing popular songs. When Mrs. Anderson glanced at Marcus, she saw a flicker of hesitation in his eyes. He hadn't immediately raised his hand like some of his classmates, and she wondered if he was nervous about performing on such a big stage. After class, she pulled him aside. "Marcus," she said gently, "I think you should sign up for the showcase. Your music deserves to be heard." He shifted uncomfortably, looking down at his shoes. "What if people don't like it?" he mumbled. "What if I mess up?" Mrs. Anderson placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You won't know unless you try. Remember, everyone feels scared before stepping onto a stage, even professionals. But courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing something anyway because you believe in it." Her words resonated with Marcus, though he still felt uncertain. That evening, as he sat in his room working on a new beat, he thought about what she'd said. Deep down, he knew he wanted to perform, he just needed a little push. The next day, he approached Mrs. Anderson and told her he'd decided to sign up. "Good choice," she said with a smile. "Now go prepare something amazing." Over. The following weeks, Marcus threw himself into preparing for the showcase. He spent hours perfecting his track, layering beats and melodies until they sounded exactly how he envisioned them. For the lyrics, he drew inspiration from his own experiences, the struggles of growing up without a father figure, the teasing he endured, and the moments of triumph when he proved doubters wrong. By the time he finished writing, the song felt deeply personal yet universal enough for others to connect with. On the night of the showcase, the school auditorium was packed with students, parents, and teachers. Backstage, Marcus nervously adjusted his headphones, trying to calm his racing heart. He glanced around at the other performers, some of whom were warming up their voices or practicing dance moves. Despite the chaos, he managed to find a quiet corner where he could focus. When his name was called, Marcus stepped onto the stage, bathed in soft blue light. Holding the microphone tightly, he took a deep breath and began rapping. His voice started shaky but grew stronger with each line. The beat pulsed through the speakers, filling the room with energy. As he performed, he poured his soul into every word, letting the audience feel the emotion behind his lyrics. By the time he reached the final verse, the crowd was on its feet, cheering and clapping along to the rhythm. When the last note faded, the auditorium erupted into applause. Marcus stood frozen for a moment, overwhelmed by the response. Then, smiling broadly, he bowed and walked off stage, his heart soaring. Backstage, Mrs. Anderson greeted him with tears in her eyes. "That was incredible, Marcus," she said, pulling him into a tight hug. "You did it. You showed everyone exactly who you are." He grinned, feeling a sense of pride he'd never experienced before. "Thanks, Mrs. Anderson. I couldn't have done it without your support." She shook her head. "Don't thank me. You're the one who put in the work. All I did was remind you that you're capable of greatness." As they stood there, surrounded by the buzz of excited students and proud parents, Marcus realized how far he'd come. Just a year ago, he'd been the kid who joked about Diddy being his dad to mask his insecurities. Now he was standing tall, unafraid to share his story with the world. In the days following the showcase, Marcus received an outpouring of support from his classmates and teachers. Some kids congratulated him in the hallways, while others asked for tips on writing lyrics. Even the older boys who used to tease him approached him with genuine admiration. "Man, that was awesome," one of them said. "You're gonna make it big someday." The praise was nice, but what mattered most to Marcus was the validation he felt within himself. For the first time, he truly believed in his abilities, not because someone else told him to, but because he'd proven it to himself. At home, Lisa celebrated her son's success by baking his favorite chocolate cake. Sitting together at the kitchen table, she listened intently as Marcus recounted every detail of the showcase. "I'm so proud of you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You've worked so hard for this, and you deserve every bit of happiness it brings." Marcus smiled, feeling grateful for everything his mom had sacrificed to give him opportunities. "Thanks, Mom. I couldn't have done it without you either." Despite the recognition and encouragement, Marcus remained grounded. He knew that success didn't happen overnight, and that there would still be challenges along the way. Music production required resources he didn't currently have: better equipment, access to studios, and connections in the industry. But instead of letting these limitations discourage him, he used them as motivation to keep pushing forward. Mrs. Anderson continued to support him, connecting him with local mentors and encouraging him to apply for scholarships. She reminded him that setbacks were part of the process and that resilience would carry him farther than talent alone. Years later, when Marcus looked back on that period of his life, he remembered it as a turning point, a moment when he discovered not only his passion but also his strength. The journey hadn't been easy, but every challenge had taught him something valuable. And through it all, Mrs. Anderson had been there, guiding him with patience and belief. For Mrs. Anderson, Marcus's transformation reinforced why she became a teacher in the first place. Watching him grow from a struggling student into a confident, young artist reminded her of the power of second chances and the importance of seeing potential in every child. Though their paths eventually diverged, the bond they formed during those pivotal months stayed with them forever. And so, Marcus continued, pursuing his dreams, knowing that no matter what obstacles lay ahead, he had the tools and the courage to overcome them. Years passed, and Marcus's life continued to evolve in ways that surprised even him. What started as a dream fueled by imagination and self-expression grew into something tangible, a career path he was determined to follow no matter the odds. But success didn't come overnight. It required sacrifice, perseverance, and countless late nights spent honing his craft. Through it all, Marcus carried the lessons he learned during those transformative years in middle school. The importance of believing in himself, standing up to adversity, and never letting anyone dim his light. After graduating high school, Marcus faced yet another challenge: pursuing higher education without financial support. His mom, Lisa, had always encouraged him to aim high, but tuition costs were daunting. Determined not to give up, Marcus applied for scholarships and grants, using his music portfolio as part of his application. To his amazement, he earned a partial scholarship to a local community college with a strong arts program. Though it wasn't the glamorous music school he'd once dreamed of attending, it gave him access to mentors, equipment, and opportunities to collaborate with other artists. During his first semester, Marcus threw himself into his studies, learning everything he could about music theory, production techniques, and sound engineering. He also joined a campus club focused on hip-hop culture, where he performed at open mic nights and helped organize events. These experiences not only sharpened his skills but also expanded his network, introducing him to people who shared his passion. One evening after a particularly successful performance, Marcus received an unexpected message from Mrs. Anderson. She had heard about his achievements through mutual friends and wanted to congratulate him. "I'm so proud of you," she wrote. "Never forget how far you've come and how much farther you can go." Reading her words, Marcus felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. Though they hadn't spoken in years, her impact on his life remained profound. He replied, thanking her for believing in him when he doubted himself. Their brief exchange reignited their connection, and they began staying in touch regularly, sharing updates about their lives. As Marcus progressed through college, he started gaining recognition outside of campus. A video of one of his performances went viral on social media, catching the attention of a local radio DJ who invited him to record a session. This exposure opened doors to collaborations with other emerging artists and eventually led to a gig producing tracks for an independent label. By the time he graduated, Marcus had built a modest reputation in the music scene, earning enough income to support himself while continuing to create. Despite his growing success, Marcus stayed humble. He often thought back to the struggles he faced growing up, the teasing, the financial hardships, and the moments of self-doubt. Those experiences shaped him into the person he was today, reminding him to stay grounded and grateful. Whenever he encountered young people facing similar challenges, he made it a point to offer guidance and encouragement, just as Mrs. Anderson had done for him. One summer, Marcus returned to his old middle school as a guest speaker for a career day event. Walking through the familiar hallways brought back memories, both painful and inspiring. When he stepped into Mrs. Anderson's classroom, now decorated with new posters and student projects, he felt a lump form in his throat. "Look, who's here?" Mrs. Anderson exclaimed, beaming as she introduced him to her current students. "This is Marcus Johnson, one of my former students. He's a talented musician and producer who's making waves in the industry." The students listened intently as Marcus shared his journey, from the day he claimed Diddy as his dad to performing on stages across the city. He spoke candidly about the challenges he faced and the importance of finding mentors who believed in him. "Dreams don't happen because they're easy," he told them. "They happen because you fight for them even when things get tough. And sometimes all it takes is one person to believe in you to change your life." When the Q&A session began, hands shot up eagerly. One student asked, "What do you do when people make fun of your dreams?" Marcus smiled, remembering his own struggles. "You keep going," he said firmly. "People will always have opinions, but at the end of the day, your dreams are yours to chase. Don't let anyone take that away from you." Another student raised her hand. "Did you ever feel like giving up?" "All the time," Marcus admitted. "But every time I thought about quitting, I reminded myself why I started. Music isn't just something I do. It's who I am. And if you find something that makes you feel alive, hold on to it with everything you've got." By the end of the presentation, the room buzzed with excitement. Several students approached Marcus afterward, asking for advice or sharing their own aspirations. Seeing their enthusiasm filled him with hope, reminding him of the power of representation and mentorship. That evening, Marcus and Mrs. Anderson sat together in the faculty lounge, reflecting on the day's events. "You've come such a long way," she said, her voice tinged with pride. "Do you remember how unsure you were back then? Look at you now, inspiring others to chase their dreams." Marcus chuckled softly. "It's funny, isn't it? Back then I thought pretending Diddy was my dad was just a silly joke. Now I realize it was more than that. It was me trying to imagine a better future for myself." Mrs. Anderson nodded thoughtfully. "And look where that imagination has taken you. You've turned your dreams into reality, Marcus. That's something truly special." They talked for hours, reminiscing about the past and discussing the future. Marcus promised to stay in touch, vowing to return to the school whenever he could to mentor students. He knew firsthand how much difference a single moment of encouragement could make, and he wanted to pay it forward. In the years that followed, Marcus's career continued to flourish. He released his debut album, which received critical acclaim for its raw honesty and innovative sound. Critics praised his ability to blend personal storytelling with universal themes, calling him a voice for the next generation. Despite his rising fame, Marcus remained committed to giving back. He launched a non-profit organization aimed at providing resources and mentorship to young artists from underserved communities, ensuring that others wouldn't have to face the same barriers he did. Mrs. Anderson followed his journey closely, cutting out articles about his accomplishments and pinning them to her bulletin board. She often shared his story with her students, using it as an example of what determination and resilience could achieve. "If Marcus can do it," she'd tell them, "so can you." One day, while preparing for a concert in his hometown, Marcus received an invitation to speak at an education conference. The organizers wanted him to share his experiences as both a student and an artist, highlighting the role teachers play in shaping futures. For Marcus, it was an opportunity to honor Mrs. Anderson publicly, to thank her not just as a former student, but as someone whose belief had changed the course of his life. Standing on stage before hundreds of educators, Marcus recounted the pivotal moment when Mrs. Anderson apologized for mocking his dreams. "At the time, I didn't realize how much that apology meant," he said. "But looking back, it taught me two important lessons. First, that it's okay to admit when you're wrong, and second, that redemption is possible if you're willing to try again." He paused, scanning the audience. "Teachers have the power to inspire or to discourage. Every word you say, every action you take, leaves an impression. So please never underestimate the impact you can have on a child's life. Sometimes, all it takes is one person to believe in you to change everything." The room erupted into applause, and when Marcus finished speaking, he spotted Mrs. Anderson sitting in the front row, tears streaming down her face. Afterward, she hugged him tightly, overcome with emotion. "You've made me so proud," she whispered, "not just as a teacher, but as a human being." As Marcus walked off stage that evening, he reflected on how far he'd come since the easy days of claiming Diddy as his dad. His journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. Along the way, he'd discovered not only his talent, but also his purpose, to inspire others to dream big and work hard, no matter where they started. And, though fame and success brought many rewards, none compared to the fulfillment of knowing he'd made a difference. For Marcus, that was the true measure of success. Not the accolades or the money, but the lives he touched and the legacy he left behind. For Mrs. Anderson, watching Marcus thrive reinforced her belief in the power of teaching. She carried his story with her always, a reminder that even the smallest acts of kindness could ripple outward, changing lives in ways she might never fully understand. Together, they proved that redemption, growth, and transformation were always possible. All it took was courage, belief, and the willingness to try again.